So we didn't want to have this conversation tonight and list all these bad things that have happened without also talking about some solutions as well. And there are resources. So if you've been hearing these examples and think, that's me, I get these inappropriate text messages or gift messages or whatever. What now? We talked to an expert. I spoke with Mary Kuntz, an attorney who's worked on cases involving sexual harassment, and she gave us some pragmatic advice. You have told me there are two different classifications that people should be aware of in their workplace of sexual harassment if they're encountering that. What's the first one?
The first one is the very direct and recognizable one, when an employer asks for sexual favors in return for a promotion or employment or some advancement at work. That is the most obvious and the sort of easiest to recognize.
Sure, the one that we've seen in commercials and things like that.
Right.
And then there's a second one, and that one's more about comfort level and a feel in the office and your experience.
Right, and that's called harassment, and that would be comments or gestures, anything that is changing your workplace into a hostile workplace such that it's hard for you to get your job done.
So one pat on the back or touch on the shoulder does not harassment make?
Absolutely not.
Companies, most of them have now pretty smartly legally put in place a structure that you have to go through to document it. And there's a reason for that.
What the courts have said is that if there's a structure in place and the employee who files the complaint didn't follow this structured system for reporting this or didn't report it at all, then the company is not going to be held responsible. You need to look up what your company's policy is, and you need to follow that policy. You also need to be making documents, and you need to keep in mind that your computer at work, you have no expectation of privacy, so don't be documenting it at work.
What's the first step? If any of this sounds familiar to me, I'm encountering this, once I write it down, who should I go to?
Well, you should look at what the company policy says, but there's generally at least a couple of different places you could go. And you need to be aware that if you go to HR is working for the company. Their job is to protect the company. So if you bring them a complaint of sex discrimination, they're required to process this complaint, but they're not looking to help you. Okay, so you need to be very self-protective. You need to write down when you talk to the company. The other thing you need to watch is that from the point in time that this incident, whatever triggered your concern, happened, you have 180 days, possibly in your state 300 days, until you file at the EEOC. You have to follow your company's procedure, but they're not going to hold that 180 days in advance. That clock is ticking.
One more thing that Mary, she told me that retaliation, it is illegal. But if you think that's going to protect you always, you might be mistaken. So sometimes you have to go about this in a more calculated way than many people have done in the past. Just keep that in mind.